On this episode of the High Quality Fun podcast, we talk to Sky, who tells us about her life and passion for seeing the world and meeting people of different cultures. After a forced vacation while serving in the Navy, Sky got her first taste of the world visiting Norway for 3 months. From this point on, she was hooked. After the Navy, she played a heavy hand in convincing her company to let everyone work remotely many years before the pandemic, which allowed her to live all around the world. In this episode, we talk about her digital nomadic lifestyle, well before mobile hotspots and international plans. We cover some of the places she visited and the people she met along the way. Ironically, we dive into a wild story about the start of COVID that trapped her in Europe for several months with a complete stranger. This interview was really entertaining, and I love talking about how the world and technology has evolved over the past 10 years to allow more people to embrace this lifestyle and live a life with more freedom. Stay tuned to hear what it's like to live free and learn a bit about what it takes to become a digital nomad on this episode of the High Quality Fun podcast.
I was in the military. I started in 2011, and then I got out in 2015. But because I had a job that was just really hard to take time away from, in the Navy, they always kicked back my leave requests every time, if it was like a weekend, if it was a couple of days, if it was to go see family. And then one day, after two and a half years of not being able to take leave, my chief came to me and he was like, "Hey, I realize that you actually have enough leave that they're going to start taking it away if you don't use it. So I have to approve your leave. And so you've got like 70 something days. You need to go somewhere in like a month." And it was like, "Oh, okay." And that was 2013. And so I had just
I
gotten
assume
divorced.
that's all paid for too, right?
So it's paid time off. Like leave is basically paid time off. Like you
Okay.
have, I had 70 days where they would pay me like I was at work. So full paychecks, which is great, but they don't pay for, they don't actually pay for like any of the travel, which is, shucks. If a recruiter ever tells you that they do, it's a lie. But, yeah, so I was like, okay, I have a couple of days, and I'd just gotten divorced, and I'd always wanted to go to Norway. I hadn't had a honeymoon when I was married, so I was like, this is like my own personal honeymoon, awesome. And I saw the fjords of Norway like on an ad somewhere, and it was like, that's where I'm going. I've never even heard of this, hadn't really heard of the place. Like everybody knows Norway, but it's not something top of mind. I think it is a little bit more these days. So yeah, I flew from Atlanta to New York to London to Oslo, and landed in Oslo. And it was like walking into a dream, because in 2013, you didn't have you didn't have a smartphone that you could just take an international plan and like go. So and I was too expensive to stay in hotels, and Airbnb was like a year old. Like I had to lie on my leave that I was in a hotel because they didn't know about Airbnb. And the military didn't think it was safe. So, but I booked some stuff on Airbnb, and at that time, you didn't have the concept of booking like an entire place. Like these days, I think if I go somewhere, it's like, oh, I'm looking for a whole apartment, and it's actually contributed negatively to a lot of economies like Amsterdam, Paris, and people trying to find stuff locally, which is interesting, the transition that's been made. But back then, it was still, when you book somewhere, I booked with a couple that had just had their first baby. They had a spare bedroom from a roommate that moved out. And so I was like, with this little fresh-faced baby in a Norwegian home, and it was really, really cool. So
It's funny you mentioned that because I know Eric and I went to Denver when Airbnb was like fresh, and the guy lived in the house with us.
Yeah.
And now, if I think about it, over the past like 5 years, I don't think we've ever stayed in the same place as a person.
Yeah, I don't think I have. I've had like the shared, like it'll be a duplex and they're on like one
Yeah.
side, but you have your own entry and stuff. But yeah, I think probably I stayed in a couple in 2017, but then in like 2018 is when they debuted the like Airbnb long-term lets. And that was a game changer. But yeah, back then it was like $30, it was safer than a hostel, which for me was important as like a solo female traveler. I was like, I think I was like 20 something, yeah, early 20s. Like, yeah, I think 20 or 21. Um, and just like everyone was scared when I left. It was like, you can't solo travel by yourself. You're a woman. You're gonna get sex trafficked. And I was like, everything's gonna be okay. Don't worry. And through like choosing a country by accident that happens to be one of the safest countries in the world and has been for the past 20 years, but also just like I had never even been to New York City by myself. So like having a little bit of awareness and like, oh, I just have to pay attention. And like, if I wouldn't do it in the US, definitely not doing it abroad. She says very confidently. And then I basically did a couple days in Oslo and then went up to the Fjordlands to see the actual fjords. And it was like April. Like I didn't think about any of the travel. I went in the cold months. And then I was driving through the fjords. Driving in a foreign country was exciting. It was very also foreign. Like I had to get a foreign passport for my driver's license, which doesn't exist anymore. Like that's something that's changed. You can just go now. And just like driving in a foreign country, this beautiful area, and just in absolute awe, not even having to worry about my safety. It was so much fun. And then I met this British photographer. And he was like, oh, there's polar bears in Tromsø, all the way up north in the Arctic Circle. And I was like, well, I guess I'm going to the Arctic Circle then. And I like hopped a flight the next day. And then it turns out there's no polar bears on the mainland Europe. That's in Svalbard, which is very, very far. But I ended up in this amazing place where I found out that there was snowboarding and I was a snowboarder. So I was like, oh, I should get some snow pants and like go snowboarding because it's April in Norway in the Arctic Circle. Obviously you go snowboarding. And then
I think I underestimate how tall Norway actually is.
Oh my gosh, because it's like you can drive this way. It's like Vermont, actually. You can drive this way in like an hour and a half to 2 hours in most parts. But then it's like, I think it was like 3 days to top to bottom it. Like
wow.
It's very long. Yeah. And it's gorgeous. There's actually, if anybody's looking to go to Norway, the Atlantic Highway is amazing. It's stunning. It's very well marked, which is great. It's all very pristine roads. Yeah, I went in to go to a snowboard shop and this guy was like, oh my God, are you American? It's so rare that we get Americans up here. Like, we're having a birthday party for my roommate tonight. Like, you should come out. And for some reason, like not even a hair on my head stood up where it was like, this could be dangerous. I was like, okay, sure. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and 20, 21. This will be fun. And like Norwegian hospitality is, I've traveled for years and years and years now. You know, it's been more than 10 years since Norway, and like it's unrivaled. Norwegian hospitality is peak hospitality. They had me move out of my hotel so I could stay with his female roommates in this like beautiful room, and they showed me all around this area hiking, and then they had contact that when I went back down south, they like set me up with places to stay there. It was so much fun. And it just like hooked me into how amazing and how different the world is outside the US, which like I kind of knew, you know, like some people know, some people don't. I like knew a little bit, but then experiencing it alone for the first time was so eye-opening. And then like making friends that are friends for life now, you know, like I could call them up and be like, hey, I'm coming to Norway. They'd be like, I have a kid now, but I have a friend you can stay with. Like, you know, it's pretty sweet. And it really just like, I don't know, something about it. It was like, this is for me. I don't know how to make this happen, but this is for me. And then was like miserable in the Navy for 2 more years and then got out and promptly like went back to Europe. And again, you know, didn't even bother having a phone out because there's no international plans. You could take pictures. It was like the iPhone, maybe 3 or 4. I don't know what era we were in iPhone wise in 2015, but like you had to use your laptop to tell your family that you were safe at an internet cafe or a hotel where they might have Wi-Fi that you pay extra for. And I did like a month in France. And then while I was traveling, interviewed for a job back here in the States. Because obviously back in, 2015, nobody knew like digital nomad or remote work was like the very vaguest of possibilities. I don't think, I certainly had never heard of it. Maybe 1 or 2 people have mentioned it, but you don't think it's possible. And so I interviewed at this company called Such a Voice. We do voiceover education and demo production, which is a very fun way of saying like we train voice actors to do things like podcasts or audiobooks, etc. And it was something I no idea anything about, but they were very fun. It was very niche. And so they were like, well, when you come back to the US, because we recognize you're in Europe, like in a month and a half, when you get here, come into the office, we'll set you up. Like, we'd love to have you on. Sweet. Nailed a job.
Let's take a quick break and hear from our sponsors. Here on the High Quality Fun podcast, we love showcasing people's stories through our interviews and posts. This gives our guests the opportunity to share their favorite memories, but sometimes audio alone is not enough. Most people are sitting on a collection of hundreds of photos and videos capturing their favorite moments without the time or experience needed to compile these memories into a video. This is why I have chosen to partner with Spivo. Simply send them your unsorted photos and videos, and in 7 days or less, they will create a professional video edit that allows you to relive your favorite memories again and again. To ensure every customer is satisfied with their video edit, Spivo provides unlimited revisions for 30 days and offers a 100% money-back satisfaction guarantee. As someone who has limited time to edit his family adventures, let alone this podcast, I am excited to work with Spivo to help everyone eternalize their favorite moments. Visit spivo.com/discount/high-quality-fun to learn more and let us know what you think about the product. We'd love to share it. Now, back to the show.
And when I showed up, it's in like this warehouse. Everybody's got their little, it was, what was that? January 2016. Everyone worked from a laptop. Like it was a very casual atmosphere, despite still being professional. Like everybody got their work done, but very casual. Like I was the most uptight person coming out of the military. So it's like, oh, I have to make a great impression. And then as time, like I spent my first year with them just doing good work, all of us worked together in the office. The company was growing very quickly, but everything was still online. Like all of the stuff that we did as Such a Voice was online. And so that was unusual for me, but I think it was growing, like startups doing small things online was growing. And then our CEO loved to kick off to the Dominican Republic and like areas in the Caribbean and South America to go kite surfing and windsurfing with his wife. And he would just like find places to work and then take terrible phone calls down the DR to get his work done. And then I kept wanting to go back. I did a trip in 2016 that I took, 3 weeks off to go drive Nova Scotia, which was one of the best trips ever. And again, like just getting out there, it was like, this is, how do I make this happen? And so then I got moved into human resources. And one of my colleagues came to me and he was like, look, I don't want to quit. We work from laptops. I'm a cyclist. I want to cycle all the way across the USA, Vermont to like Arizona and then Seattle and back again. Can we make that happen or do I have to quit? And I was like, let's see what we can do. And so we basically worked out like cycle for 3 days, work for 3 days, cycle for 3 days, work for 3 days. And at the same time, I told the CEO, like, go to the DR like you usually do. And I'm going to go to Europe for like 4 months. And we're going to like pioneer this little work remote thing. And this was in the beginning of 2017. So I spent 4 months in Europe. My colleague cycled across the US successfully, which like, everybody has their thing. I wouldn't do that, and then the CEO, like we all did our work very well. Like nothing was sacrificed, nothing was done poorly. And so we kind of realized like, A, why are we paying for a huge office space when we don't have to be? B, everybody can live a better life and like we can live the 4-hour work week. And we decided starting in the end of 2017, like everyone's home free. And for some people that means I can work remotely and be around my family because my wife just had a baby, or I've always wanted to start a garden and I have to be around for these sort of things, or get a puppy. And for other people like myself, it was like, well, my dream has come true, like I'm gonna travel the world. And of course there's some learning things. Like I did find out rather quickly that 8 hours from the East Coast was like my max. So I had to stay within, and that was just because of like I didn't want to work in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like I remember at one point I was in Prague and I was taking a phone call at like 1 o'clock in the morning. I was like, oh, this has to stop. I can't be coming out of a club like kind of tipsy, taking a phone call from my boss. Like I need to go
when
back.
he's like eating breakfast, yeah.
Yeah. Which, you know, it's fun and it's part of the learning thing. But yeah, I've just been able to go to all these amazing places, and it's so interesting to see like the shift societally, the shift globally, the shift in technology. Like if you had told me in 2019 that something was going to happen in the world that made the entire world be able to go remote the following year, I would have laughed. I'd be like, no, there's like, I meet like maybe 15 to 20 digital nomads every 3 months or so. Most of them are in Bali or Spain. Like, it was just so, it wasn't really done. Like, digital nomad was just like a group of traveling bums and surfers and scuba divers. So it wasn't really a thing yet. But it was fun to meet people because you also would meet people that like, oh, I took 3 months off to go travel, or I've had enough, I sold everything, I moved abroad. Like it was really interesting the people that you would meet. And then just kind of the adventures that you would have. Like that initial adventure in Norway always stands out to me because I was welcomed by strangers. I got to go snowboarding under the Norwegian, or not the Norwegian, the Aurora Borealis. Yeah, the Northern Lights
awesome.
in like chest deep backcountry snow. Like it was,
gosh.
It like 20, 21 or however old I was, me had no idea. It was like, this is the oyster. The oyster is this world. Okay, I can do this. and yeah, it's just been amazing. And that one stands out. But there's been like other times, some like much simpler, but like just like amazing times, you know, like how fun and lucky you can make your whole life. It doesn't have to be like little windows that you cut out for yourself.
So that was a perfect introduction. There's so many threads I want to pull on.
Yeah, pull them.
So one thing that I've said this before, but the one cool thing about this podcast is I'm getting FaceTime with people that I probably wouldn't have called normally. Like you and I know each other, but we see each other maybe every other year. And now I get to sit back, listen, hear this adventure, and you know, the hospitality shows whenever you are like sharing a hobby. So it seems to me like,
true.
Yeah. So anytime you travel, you kind of get these really generous moments from strangers, and you should be reserved, but it just seems to come out so naturally. Like we went out to Vancouver where we got engaged, and we were just like, you know, on cloud nine because we're engaged. We're at this bar talking to this guy at the bar, and just like, man, this is an incredible part of the world. Vancouver is gorgeous. If you've ever been, they just have like insane mountain backdrops. There's water everywhere.
Yeah. I've been to Banff and Jasper, but not further west. So
we went to Seattle, and I was like, this is cool. And then we went to Vancouver, and I was like, Seattle
this is better.
Like this, yeah, it's like way bigger mountains, way more water.
Yeah.
But this guy was like hemming and hawing. He's like, man, I really should give you my car keys because you should go and drive into the mountains tomorrow. And I'm just like, holy crap, man. That's amazing. He didn't end up doing it, but it's just like, I don't know. You get that stuff when you travel all the time, just random spritz of hospitality.
Hospitality, mentoring, like I've been so lucky and sometimes bad. Like, don't get me wrong, I've definitely like trusted the wrong people. There was a wonderful Syrian man that gave me food poisoning that I will always remember. Like, shouldn't trust everybody.
Oh man. Yeah. You definitely got to be careful, and you bring up a good point with like being a girl. You know, when we're together as a unit, as a couple, we can kind of
much safer.
Yeah. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah, there's even been guests on this show that have said like, yeah, if you're ever out in Utah, hit us up.
The people absolutely. You meet. Even if it's like a friend of a friend, definitely.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I got some of the guests. I mean, right off the bat, I'm like, well, after this episode, she's gonna hook me up with the cyclist who biked across the United States, so I can talk to him.
He would definitely have some stories.
Oh yeah, we're gonna make it happen. But yeah, the other thread I wanted to pull on is we have a young family, so 2 kids under 3, and I work fully remote. My wife is fortunate enough that she can stay at home with the kids and kind of help bring them up. But we think about this like all the time, and we probably abuse my work from home a little bit. Like last week I went down to Georgia because unfortunately one of my family members passed away, and I was like logging in from the road while the kids were napping, working on stuff, and at night I would log in for a few hours to get caught up on stuff. Even though I had bereavement, I was just trying to, make myself available.
Which you have to be careful of.
Yeah, and that is hard too. It's a hard balance. So I just like lock myself in my room all day, or do I get off early and come hang out with my family, which is the main reason I'm doing all this stuff. So I don't know. I mean, we told the story right before the episode. We towed a pop-up out to Colorado, and our kids were both under 2 at the time, so even worse, even harder, I'll say that. And we ended up camping in the mountains after the wedding, and we decided to throw everyone in the car and go to Aspen just to see the town. It was in the summer, so whatever. And in 2 cases, we met 2 families with 2 girls that are 2 years apart, like literally copy and paste of our situation. And they were living out in Colorado, working remote as a family, like sending their kids to camps there. And like ever since then, I've just been interested in doing this. I know you said you've met a lot of families that have done like the digital nomad stuff, and maybe you can tell some stories about people you've met there.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Well, but before the interesting thing is what you mentioned about like abusing the remote capability, which pre-2020, I would have said the same thing. Like, oh my God, I'm totally abusing it. Like I wake up and I go swim in the sea, and then I go and wander and have a cigarette with an espresso with like the local guy that gives me a moped in the afternoon. And I work like 4 hours. But those 4 hours a day, I have found that what remote work has done, it has forced me to enjoy more hours of the day while being more productive for the hours that I'm actually working. Because it's like I can see the ocean from my living room, and I need to be down there, so I need to hurry up and finish this up and do a good job so I don't have to repeat it. And so I found that it made me like the productivity was just way more honed in, and I still think it is. And what I think the pandemic did was like, unfortunately, because now so many people went remote that it's like, oh, but now you can just be available anytime. And that's something I actually have talked to with some people who are also remote families and otherwise, is like, you have to guard your time now rather than just being like, oh, okay, I finished this, I'm out, bye, I'm going scuba diving, I'm going hiking, I'm going wherever. And I think that families are actually doing a better job than individuals because it's their family time. And that is so precious to them. It's not just like, oh, I want to go experience, this concert or this, this drinking thing or whatever. It's, I have to guard my time because this is my family and my children are being raised. And so that's really cool. But yeah, I actually met a single mom. She had and it was a small enough infant. I want to say it was like 8 or 9 months old. She had birthed it in the US and then flown abroad. And like as soon as the baby was able to be like traveled, she started traveling. And she would just keep it like wrapped up. I met her in Portugal. And she's like, this is the best. Like all these women want to help me raise my child. I'm finding community everywhere. Like I could drop my child off with people that I've met recently that I trust wholly because like they're our type of people. I can go to the beach, I can go hiking, and like it's a slower paced life despite still having like 8-hour days sometimes, and she was actually in the process of like turning some stuff online. And this was in 2018. She was trying to make things online with the current company that she was working for. But just like the ability to enjoy life as a new mother was so different than someone who's got to get back into the office after being on, maternity leave. And she was just happy, and I'm sure her baby was happier for it. I spent all of 2022 in Australia, which was just amazing. And met some amazing people. Scuba diving, I think you nailed it with the hobbies. Like one of my new best best friends. She and I met on a scuba diving excursion, and like we're inseparable now. And she's actually coming to visit from Australia in a couple of months. So, but
Awesome.
you meet you meet these amazing people. But on one of the scuba diving trips, there was a guy and his wife and two boys, and they were like, I want to say they were like 12, and the youngest must have been 10 because he was barely old enough that he was allowed to get in the water with a scuba tank. Like they have children's scuba tanks, which was great. But he was like, I love what I do. My wife and I, like, we both work. We're doing it's called the Big Lap in Australia, where it takes 10 to 12 months to go all the way up and around Australia. And they were living in a van, and they were going to do the Big Lap. And they have, it's not like it was the first time I went abroad where you have to find a Wi-Fi cafe. It's not even a LAN cafe or something where you got to plug in. Now it's like, oh, we have a router in the van because we're sat linking for our meeting. It's so cool. And we all have international plans, and we go wherever. And they were from, I want to say Argentina. I think it was Argentina. And they were just living their best life. They're like, we escaped poverty. Now we own a van, and us and our kids traveling the world. It's great. So it's
And people do it for a lot of different reasons too. Like I know that if you make an American salary and you're living out in Vietnam doing digital nomads, you're living like a king.
Yeah, Croatia was like that. Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say Australia is kind of expensive though, so they're doing pretty good, right?
It's not anymore.
No?
At the time that I was there, it was like Australia is a bit more expensive. It's like Seattle or something in the States. So like Seattle prices or LA prices for things. But the US dollar is it was like $1 was like $1.70 Australian. Which, makes enough of a difference. And then, so it depends on the economy. Like some places, I went to Switzerland. I was in Geneva. I was supposed to be there for like 3 months. I was there for 10 days, and it was like, oh, this is not sustainable. We have to go. And I immediately went somewhere cheaper, which was Montenegro. And like in Montenegro, $600 gets you a villa on the water. So it's very different. Whereas like $600 would get me a couple of dinners in Geneva. So yeah, the economy definitely is hit and miss. Australia was close enough to the US that I was basically living how I would normally be living. Okay. But as a digital nomad, you're not, and I have an Australian citizenship, so I also had access to healthcare, but it's also wildly cheap outside the United States. So like I've gotten, so bills and such, your rent is basically going towards Airbnbs, which is probably changing now. Nowadays, you're probably going to have to actually get lets for 3 months. But no matter where you are, like your rent is covered. You don't have a car. You don't have car insurance. Your mobile plans, once you get there, like in Portugal, I had unlimited calls, unlimited data for $14 a month. And like, way better than the US, because in Verizon I was paying like $150 a month for the same thing. And so you're saving in so many categories. You don't have to pay for health insurance because you're going to have something like travel insurance, which covers all your health up to $200,000, and that's like $30 a month, way cheaper than health insurance in the US. So like, as silly as it sounds, when I sold everything and just left, like even though I wasn't going anywhere per se, I was saving so much money. It was wild. And then the healthcare outside the US, I know that there's like this big painting it with all sorts of brushes of socialism's bad, but I've been treated in emergency rooms in multiple countries, and they're all just as, if not better than any in the United States. So it's pretty nice.
My buddy is actually from Egypt, and he broke his shoulder in South America.
Oh, yeah.
And then, South Africa. I don't know. He broke his shoulder, and he ended up, instead of getting the surgery done in the United States, he flew back to Egypt to get it done because it was so much cheaper to do it there. It's genius, right?
Like dental tourism is a thing. When I was in Hungary, in Budapest, I was actually lamenting to a friend of mine. I was like, "Ah, I've really got like a sore tooth. And he's like, you're in Budapest. Like it's like $20 to go get a cavity filled. And it's just as good work, and not all countries necessarily, I'm sure that there's things. I mean, I had a friend that had to be treated in Thailand, and it was a packed hospital. It was unfortunate. But she was still treated well. It's still good quality healthcare. It's just a different environment. But I mean, I've been treated in Norway. I was treated for strep throat in Switzerland. Oh my God, there is nowhere else that you ever want to be treated for healthcare but Switzerland. It's amazing. But yeah, it's I don't know, there's just so many things that like you pay for in the United States that outside of the US, like when you're a digital nomad, you're not necessarily paying for. So you're saving a lot of money to do unfun things. Or travel more.
Yeah. Or travel more. Yeah, that's great.
Or
is there any
save money, but I didn't do any of that when I was really at my height.
You just went on more adventures.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure doing this for as long as you have so many like tips and tricks for people that are interested in doing this.
Yeah.
I don't know what comes to mind with those.
Oh my gosh, and things have changed a little bit. Like there's no longer the airline tips and tricks. Like the post-pandemic world of travel is very different than the pre-pandemic world of travel. Like I used to have all these tips of like, oh, if you book on these days and with these airlines, with this website, like you can get a $90 trip from Boston to London one way, and that's unheard of these days because it just doesn't exist anymore. But I do think like hotels are expensive. Airbnb has become way too expensive unless you can find like deals on them. And even then, like, oh, it's 900 quid a month, but then it turns out to be 1,200 or 1,500 for a room because of all the fees and stuff. Vrbo's awesome. Most of the places that are on Airbnb, they're now run by agencies. So if you Google like month-long Let's Scotland, you're going to find a whole world of affordability versus using something like Airbnb. I know that you can get international plans with whatever, if you're Google Fi, which is the best one.
That's what we have.
Yeah, it's a game. When I switched from Verizon to Google Fi, it was like, oh, this is amazing. But no matter who you are, like, yeah, you'll have access to an international plan. Skip it. Take your SIM card out, get a SIM card when you land because it's going to be way cheaper. And then you don't have to pay any international fees. And everything's connected because you don't have to like call home anymore. You can, if you're connected to Wi-Fi, FaceTime, you can Facebook Messenger, Instagram, Skype still. You can still pay $3 for like 20 minutes of Skype time. There's so much, like you don't have to have call and text anymore. And so that's a game changer to save money. Yeah, I don't know. And then always never get insurance through the airlines. Always get insurance through the third parties like World Nomads. There's one called, I think, Budgie Travels, which is an Aussie one, but like anybody can get it. Because it's, even if you're only going for a week and you don't expect anything to happen, if you get sick, it covers any of your medical bills. If you lose your luggage, it gives you up to $2,000 in new luggage while you're there. Things like that are really important. So I watched a guy like lose a camera down a chasm in Portugal. And he was like, oh, that's like a $6,000 camera. And I was like, oh, you have travel insurance, right? And he was like, no.
Oh my gosh.
Always. And it covers legs of travel because I remember when COVID kicked off, I had pre-booked because the way that I used to travel, like I was pre-booking 9 to 12 months in advance for Airbnbs because it's like 3 months in Paris or, 6 months in Croatia. Like everything was pre-booked because otherwise you're like getting, the bottom of the barrel stuff that nobody wants. And so everything was pre-booked for good deals and good choices. And when the pandemic like fresh hit, which, I like, it's interesting to see how people remember it, but I specifically remember the fear that everybody suddenly had and how airlines started just canceling everything. And I reached out to my, I was out like $4,000 or $5,000 just in travel expenses. And when I contacted my TripAdvisory, because they hadn't upgraded anything, it was like, don't worry, we got it. Here's the money. I was like, oh, so like trip insurance is really great.
That's a good transition because I know that you kind of had some unexpected travel with the
Oh,
pandemic. You want to tell that
yeah,
story?
yeah. Yeah, it was such a bummer, but also like I wouldn't change it. Because I was in Scotland in Edinburgh for Hogmanay, which is it's amazing, which is the New Year celebration. So 2019 into 2020, I did Hogmanay. I spent like 30 days in Edinburgh, which is just it's my favorite city in the whole wide world that I've been to. It's gorgeous. It's my favorite. I'll always go back. um, and so I was there for all of January. And then February was supposed to be spent in Cornwall. February into like a little bit into March was going to be spent in Cornwall, in southwestern UK. And then I was going to spend spring, like 4 months in Paris, because I'd always wanted to spend spring in Paris with the blooms and like all the beautiful stuff. And
Did
then
you
back
have
to
all this
Croatia.
booked in advance? Like you
All of
knew
it.
that you were hopping. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, good
Yeah.
job.
It was all booked up until I want to say September, because I was supposed to go back to Croatia and I had booked a 3 month stint up until September after Paris in Croatia. And so it was so interesting because I was in Cornwall and I had a friend that was going to fly out because it's a 7 hour train ride from London, or it's a 2 hour flight. And so he was going to fly out to come and visit. And it was just absolutely stunning. It's low season in Cornwall. Nobody's there. It's just like the sea and a couple of cafes. And it's gorgeous. And so every day I would just like go for a walk. And we started hearing like rumblings in February, but nothing was really happening yet. Like it was so interesting how it happened because he ended up booking some tickets to come out, and they got canceled. It was like February 26th. They got canceled the next day. And then the airline went under. Like it was a Chinese owned, very small, like scale airline. And the whole airline just suddenly went belly up for no reason. And it was on the news. And it was like, oh, this is related to at the time they must have been calling it an epidemic in China. And it was all very hush hush because of the Wuhan stuff, and they didn't want,
Yeah.
panic. And then over the course of like 3 days, it went from hush hush to, oh, God, can I curse on your podcast? I'm sorry.
You can swear. Scream it.
Yeah, it went from like everything's kind of fine. This is a bit weird and awkward. Interesting news to oh fuck. And I remember I called one of my friends back in the US because my dad had called me that morning and I was starting to get a little jittery. It was like because I'd gone to the grocery store and the grocer was like, we're going to be shutting down for a couple of days. Do you want to take some extra stuff? And so they gave me like cucumbers and some green beans and like, a little bit of steak and eggs and stuff. I was like, oh, this is amazing. Thank you. And I got back to the Airbnb, which was the best Airbnb I've ever stayed at. I was so sad I had to cut it short. And my dad called me and he was like, you need to come home. I don't know what you guys are seeing on the news. You need to come back to the United States right now. I was like, okay, hold on, hold your horses. I'm going to contact my Airbnb lady. It's Friday. I'm going to go back to London on Sunday, but I have so much laundry and stuff to do. I couldn't possibly cut things short. And then by the evening, I had FaceTimed my friend and had put it on the computer, and I was like, okay, things are getting really weird. Like over the space of a couple of hours, the US started shutting down international flights coming in.
Yep.
Yeah. And so I was on the phone with her and I was like, okay, we have to book something. That means I have to get to London tomorrow. I'm like shoving things into my suitcase. And I stay at a place for usually 3 months at a time, at minimum a month, minimum. And so I was supposed to be at this place for like 8 weeks. And what I did, because I'm very, hoity-toity sometimes, I always travel with like a little candle and I have my own like little mixing bowls and like I have all these things to become home as quickly as possible. And so I had just like exploded into this Airbnb and I could not pack it fast enough. And so I was on FaceTime with her and I was about to book a flight, and on Google Flights, it went like it was just flipping down, canceled, 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 canceled.
Oh my God.
It was like, oh my God, holy shit. And it went from everything's fine, don't worry about it, to I missed my window. It's gone. And so I called my landlady, Airbnb hostess, whatever you want to call them. When it's that long, it's like a land person. And I was like, hey, do you know anybody that is going to have a let like open for longer? Because she had family. She told me earlier, like, hey, I have family coming back after you, so like you can't stay longer. And she was like, I don't know if my family's going to make it. I don't think you should stay in Cornwall. You don't know anybody here, and if things shut down, you have no help. And that was actually very, very wise. She was like in her 60s. It was a very wise thing to say to me. And I, to this day, am very appreciative. She was like, if you want to leave, you just put the keys in the mailbox and go. It's like, okay, I think I'm going to try to go tomorrow. And it was like, if I just get to London, I can fly back to the States because there's 12 ports of entry that you legally cannot be denied entry to as a United States citizen. That's what I'm going to do. And then Pence started shutting those down. So the next morning, I paid £400, and I was the only person on a train for 7 hours. And then like one guy boarded, and he was like, "Is this empty?" Like, yeah, I don't know what's happening. And just in those like 48 to 72 hours, the entirety of the UK shut down because I got to London at 2 p.m. on Sunday. And mind you, I had started this process on Friday. Everything like went to shit. And then Sunday, I got in at 2 p.m. to London, and I had contacted an Airbnb that I'd stayed with years ago. It's like, hi, I'm so sorry. Do you have anything available? There's no hotels that will accept me because I'm a foreigner and I don't have a right to be here. And they were like, yes, but we're not there. We're trying to get to France, to our second home, to leave the UK because things are shutting down and we're scared. We'll put the key under the mat. Best of luck. And so I like show up to this empty house. And they were like, and then they called me back. They were like, hey, there's another American there. Like, do you mind if she stays? Because it's multi-bedroom. And I was so lucky because it's like, I didn't know it at the time, but they were like, he was aristocracy and she was Texas oil money that like had moved there. And I'd never been into part of their house. Like I had only been in the little Airbnb spot. And it's like a 12 million pound home. It was huge. Wow. It was stunning. I was so lucky to have like fallen into this. And then this other woman showed up. She's a 60-year-old woman from Boston. Her name is Donna. And she was like, hi, I'm here too. And I was like, this is going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. And I had called because all the Tesco's, like all of the grocery stores and supermarkets were shutting down and I had no food. And it was like, tomorrow, there's no food. Like, you can't leave your home. We don't know what this is going to look like. And so I was desperately calling all around, and I got in touch. This is going to be so UK. I got in touch with a milkman who was like, I'm bringing fresh produce in that doesn't have anywhere to go. I'll drop a box or two at your door. I was like, amazing. At 3 o'clock in the morning, a milkman named Sean showed up with milk, eggs, and like a huge box of veg. And that was also the start of like the farmers trying to pawn off their veg, which becomes like a thing later. And then it just shut down. I could not legally leave this country. And I actually ended up being better that I was in London because everybody who did leave, they all got stuck in the ports of entry because Mike Pence then shut everything down. And thousands of people got COVID after being slammed in ports of entry, wall to wall for hours, which honestly is scary. And then things shifted to, hey, you can get home on this Delta flight if you have $26,000 for an economy seat. And people were paying that because we were
Holy crap.
Yeah, like I remember I called my parents and it was like, I found a ticket for $7,000. I don't have that, but I could put it on my credit card. What do you think? And my dad was like, we don't have that either. Just like off the cuff, give it a couple of days. And then like, obviously didn't fly anywhere, but everybody paid that. People were paying $30,000. My parents had a friend who was coming home from like Spain or something, paid $10,000 for an economy all the way in the back seat. It was wild. It was the wild, wild west, like overnight. And then there was like that little bit of fear because nobody knew what was happening. Nobody knew if we had it. You know, I'd been traveling, like nobody knows what's going on. And it was like, this could be like the start of 28 days later. We don't know. And it all of a sudden also became a social project almost, because over the course of 7 days, I became so happy that I was in the UK and not the US, because what we were seeing come out of the US of like riots was terrifying. Like, it was so scary that people were rioting because they were being told to stay home and wear a mask. And so it suddenly was like, you know what? Everything's going to be okay. I don't have it. Everything's going to be okay. And we were allowed, everything went into lockdown. It was very different from the States because we were in lockdown for 16 weeks of like, you can only walk up to a kilometer away from your home. You can only do like so many things. And it was kind of refreshing because it was like, oh, in the morning I get up and I go into the garden and like I do stretches and then I do a little bit of work and then I go for a walk and I pick up trash on my walk and I don't see anybody. Like, it was kind of great. It was also scary, but it was kind of great compared to like the US, where there was like riots and then Black Lives Matter kicked up and there were more riots and then there was like COVID sweeping the nation. And it just, I don't know, from my perspective, it seemed so much better. So much safer.
God, that is bonkers. And that's like, I don't know, the fact that the lady said you should get out of here, the fact that you just like tripped and fell on some old contacts that gave you a place to stay.
Yeah, it was.
I didn't realize
so
it was
lucky.
that wild of a story. I'd never heard the long form version.
Yeah, it was such a, I don't know, and I'm sure everybody has like different, if they were traveling, like everybody probably has like very scary, because you think about the reporters that were trying to get out of China, and then you think about the people that got stuck in Italy, and like, it's just wild. And then Australia like closed their borders and had like a fun girl summer while everybody else suffered. Like, I remember looking at that, and some of my friends in Australia, it was like, you're having a hot girl summer and going to the beaches and like going to rugby tournaments, and the rest of the world is scared. It was so wild. But yeah, it was definitely like, I don't know, I remember, and this is very like privileged, I never at any point thought, oh my God, if I don't get back to the US, I'm screwed. It was actually the opposite. It was very much like, I have healthcare in this country. I have people that care about their neighbors to the extent that they will check on them. And like, things are good. Things are fine. We're getting veg boxes. I'm learning how to cook beets because that's whatever shows up in the veg box is what you cook. It was crazy.
Shout out Sean the Milkman.
Sean the Milkman, he came in clutch. I don't know if the kids still say that, but he did.
Oh, they say it, I think.
Cool.
Yeah, we were supposed to actually go to Europe and I don't even know if we booked the flight or not, but it got canceled, and then we had the time. I already bought the vacations. We ended up doing a month-long road trip, living out of the truck. But this was like after most things have calmed down.
Yeah.
Still like in like during that trip we're outside the whole time, so it just felt totally normal. I think there was still people in Vegas like walking around with masks on the strip and stuff like that, but other than that was kind of a blessing in itself, because that trip is one of my favorite ones. That's wild.
It was crazy. And just like the different experience, because I remember I spoke to a guy in Florida and he was like, what do you mean you guys had multiple lockdowns? And we're like, because our first one was 16 weeks. They let us out for 2 weeks. And they're like, oh, it's spreading again. Everyone go back home. And like, we had multiple long lockdowns basically until August. But sometimes you could still go out for like a weekend. And like, I remember going to Oxford and getting to go into the chapels at Oxford, and there was nobody there. And I went to like a Rothko exhibit with nobody there at the Tate. And then I went to Portugal because I had to like do a border run because the Home Office wasn't extending visas. And so I had to go to Portugal. And the Portuguese were very displeased that I showed up. It was like a line of Portuguese people in the airport, and that was the only flight that had landed in 3 days, and me. I was like, oh, I might have fucked up.
Blend in.
Yeah, and then they were basically like, if you're staying for more than 30 days, like you're here for 3 months, have a great time. Don't get anyone killed. But I spoke to this guy from Florida, and he was like, what? We stayed home for like 10 days. What?
Yeah, Florida was pretty open.
Yeah, it was what a wildly different experience.
Yeah,
it was crazy.
That's
but
wild.
Travel will give you some crazy experiences.
I think honestly, I think this is a pretty good time to wrap it up, but we like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of want to come back to the nomad stuff. If there's anything else you want to share on that for
Yeah.
5-10 minutes, otherwise we can wrap a bow on it. I don't care.
No, I definitely like. I'm a sucker for the reason I ended up like doing like being a digital nomad is because the 10 countries in 2 weeks thing, I hated it. I hated it. It was like, I cannot abide packing up every 48 hours. And then like you get drunk at a bar, you got to be at on a train at 7 a.m. to another country, to a hostel. And so like, I encourage people to do slow travel, like take a month off, or and that's not feasible for everybody, but find a way. Talk to your work, because you never know until you ask. Like as a human resources professional, you never know until you ask. And like if low season is October, ask them if you can take October off and go spend a month somewhere, because you're going to make friends. You're going to see amazing things. You're going to find the niche places that you'd never find on Yelp and all these other things, and you're going to be able to just like take such a big breath. And I think that is like what travel gave me originally, was like being able to take a deep breath and realize that like the world doesn't have to be pedal to the floor. And so like slow travel is your friend. Take 2 weeks and go one place, like take a month and go one place, save up your time off, call in sick. Because I don't know, I've never found, like scuba diving is part of travel for me, but like I've never found anything that gives me as much joy as travel. Because you can meet anybody, you can find something new. Like one of the best trips I ever had was one where I broke my phone and ended up like camping for 10 days. And it was in Meat Cove up in Nova Scotia. And like I didn't talk to anybody. I camped on this little remote place that like one trucker showed up one time, and I like bathed in the river and like sat by the ocean, and it was unreal. It was like something had taken, the weight off of my soul. So like slow travel, find time for it. Don't be like a shitty tourist. Don't go places like Paris that are full of bed bugs. If it's on Condé Nast's top 10 where to travel, don't go to those places. But yeah, I think it's totally possible. I think a lot of people get stuck in the 9 to 5 and like, oh, I have to take care of my husband and my kids, and like, and I don't have those. So that is something that, I don't know what it's like. But I think even you guys can prove that like you can go and do it. So you got to just like get out there and do it. Even if it's once a year, it's totally worth it.
Yeah, we always like to, the draw to Airbnb was just that you get to kind of, for a brief moment in time, live like a local. And, even that's just, a weekend's not enough. So I like the concept of slow travel. I've never actually heard that term before.
Oh yeah, it was getting popular in like 2019 amongst the like 30s travel crowd, where it's like I cannot keep drinking my way through like grand tours of Europe. And there was a lot of guys doing it, which was interesting because a lot of digital nomads were women, but there's a lot of guys doing slow travel, and it's like, oh, you can show up and stay in the Highlands of Scotland or a beach in Croatia for 3 months. Fuck, how great is that? That's truly living like a local. That's meeting people, and that's why we travel. It's like Anthony Bourdain. He met people and made friends. He went back to places. I think that's another thing people shouldn't be afraid of. Like I mentioned Croatia and Scotland and Norway a lot, but that's because I've been to Scotland and Croatia every year except for this year for the past 7 years. Like you just go places that you keep finding joy. So yeah, and I think, the world of travel is definitely different post-pandemic. Everybody might be on edge. Things are more expensive, but it doesn't have to be. You can go other places. It doesn't have to be Paris. You can go to northern France where there's, just as many beautiful cathedrals and stuff and mountains for way less.
Do you have so you're in like I'll just say like a weird job. I'm kind of in a weird job too, but you seem to know you've met a lot of people that do this. So you probably have a good scope of what people do professionally to support this type of lifestyle. Can you maybe give any tips for people to maybe learn more about digital nomading and how to kind of strive for that career-wise and other ways?
Yeah, and actually, this is funny. It actually kind of coincides with like my human resources thing. Is that like there are jobs that you can't, like if you're a bartender, if you're, there are jobs that have to be done on site. But if you have a certification, if you have project management, if you have something that you can do, that can be consultancy, because the two most common jobs of digital nomads that I've met have been consultants of literally anything. Like, oh, I'm a consultant for project management. I'm a consultant for fintech. Like, I don't know what consultant is. I've been a consultant of human resources where I literally just help companies make this shift during the pandemic to remote work. And like, you soothe managers. It's like, no, they'll get the work done. It's as long as they meet KPIs, it's okay. Like, consultancy is such a bullshit term for, I sometimes hop on the phone and I keep people on project. That's what I do. And so if you can find something like that in an area of expertise, I think that's great. There are some things that will always travel: tax and accounting, voiceover, the one that I'm in, like that's something that you can do in travel. Podcasting, teaching English, you can do that in travel. That's a biggie, especially in countries like Portugal. So yeah, find the niches which are growing every single day. They're growing with AI. One of the biggest new job openings in sectors is AI project manager. Because like AI is great, but it's still a 5-year-old that you told to paint the wall, and it painted the wrong wall, and it painted it yellow instead of white. Like, so like find the niche, find a way to go online. Don't be afraid of part-time work. It is a bit hard because you can't just tell people like, oh, just get a remote job, because they don't always exist. There's a lot of job boards.
Yeah.
Remote year abroad has a lot. I could send you a bunch if you wanted to like post them with the podcast of like places that you can look. Never hesitate to reach out to foreign companies. Like, there's so many. They're called angels before they're called startups and seeds. It's like seed, angel, and startup. And there's websites that like cater to, upcoming tech that just got $1 billion to like make an app. And they need people. They need human resources. They need, people that know how to code. They need people that can keep project managers on task, that sort of thing. So I think it's just knowing where to look, not falling for the Instagram thing, because there's all these people who are like, oh, you just do affiliate marketing, or you're just a TikToker. And like, it doesn't actually pay that much. So I think it's just finding what you can do and monetizing it, which is a little bit harder than it seems. Sometimes you do just fall into things. But they are out there. You just have to look. And then, yeah, I think just being open-minded, because a lot of people get stuck in a rut of like, oh, no, I've been, insert job title here for 10 years. Like, I can't change that. It's like, well, you probably could if you wanted to. I knew a guy that it blew my mind. I like Dungeons and Dragons, and it's what started the conversation at a hostel. And he was like, oh yeah, I run online Dungeons and Dragons games, and I get paid like $2,000, $3,000 a month for it.
Whoa, that's awesome.
What? Yeah. It's like, what? And so there's always a way. There's always a way. And even if that's, I thought about it for like the briefest moment when I found out that bartenders in Australia make $37 an hour. It was like, oh, I could. And then things like, if you're into scuba diving, become a trainer. Every scuba shop in the fucking world needs a new scuba diving trainer. So like, find the things and find the niches, and it may not pay. You're not going to be able to travel the highfalutin life necessarily, unless maybe you find a sugar daddy, but that's another podcast, I'm sure. But yeah, I think it is possible. People just have to find a way, even if that's what I think a lot of Americans think of as like the Mexican work, is what I've heard it termed as, of like, oh, well, in Australia, if you're a tourist and you want to stay for a year, you can go work the mango fields for 3 months, and then you get to stay for 6, $6.79 plus however, it's a year-long visa. Yeah, so like there's always a way. There's literally always a way. If you want to travel, make it happen.
Awesome. I think that's all great advice. I feel like even with this podcast, I'm just kind of starting it. I don't know if there's any money to be made. If this falls flat on its face in a year, I still had a lot of fun talking to people. But
exactly. But if you can monetize it and it does pay for some travel,
Yeah. Then I'll
yeah,
work the 4-hour work week.
exactly.
Yeah, this is good. Is there anything you want to say before we wrap up? Any shout outs, or if you want people to
Um,
find you or your company or whatever?
Oh gosh, I do encourage people to check out voiceover because it's actually super fun. Because there's so many niches. I actually met a girl when I was in London. She did erotic voiceover work where she's just on an app and she talks to dudes, and she made so much money. I was like, oh, that's way better than the audiobook stuff people do. But you can also make good money. You can make good money as a voice actor. I met a girl on a sailboat. She podcasts, but she's got like a little voiceover booth and stuff. Like voiceover is definitely one that people could do. Marketing is always awesome. Blogging is always awesome. Yeah, and then I think if you're gonna go out and travel, like don't abuse the environment and throw trash on the ground because then you should go to hell. Never been more angry than when I've been like hiking somewhere and someone like throws something on the ground. And then like don't abuse things, and then just be so open and so kind, because my friends and I joke about it that I have like lived off of the kindness of strangers for the past 10 years, and there is a little truth to it, but it's also like reaching out and extending that kindness. So I think that goes a long way. Just be kind, be cognizant, don't be on your phone all the time. It'll be fun.
Thank you for listening to the High Quality Fun podcast. If you guys enjoyed this show, please give us a follow. And if you have a good story or just want to say hi, feel free to reach out to us on Instagram or YouTube. Thanks for listening.